Hey everybody, this is Tatro. This is something we haven't done in a while. Today we're going to be doing an Uncut Process video where I take you through my process of making music in Ableton Live completely uncut, like not taking out any of the slower moments or the struggles. This video is going to be sponsored by Ableton, and on that note, we're going to be working pretty much entirely with Push 3 in this video. I'm going to be using Push 3 as a controller. This is not standalone. I'm using it to control Ableton Live. The first sound I've chosen here is an MPE sound from Drift, the Ableton synth. The reason I wanted to specifically start with an MPE sound is because I don't really know what direction I want to go in with this track, and when I don't know what I want to do, I usually record something with the purpose of sampling in it. So I didn't want to start with a chord progression, I didn't want to start with a drum rhythm, I want to record a texture. So with an MPE sound, I can play fifths like I'm doing here, but also have that sound be dynamic and interesting, even if it's just a held drone playing fifths. So I'm just going to record that, I'm going to experiment with some tones, and then we're going to resample it in a bit. Sticking with playing just root and fifth up through the different octaves, it's going to make it a lot easier to resample this later because it doesn't have a minor or a major quality, meaning that I could use this drone in a couple different ways and it doesn't imply any specific minor or major tonality, so that it can be used in different contexts depending on what I ultimately end up building around this drone sound. So now we're going to quickly freeze and flatten this track, and we're going to start to work with it as audio. Now, like I said, I'm using Push as a controller for live here, not in standalone, but I don't think I've even had to touch the computer yet in this process, so that's one advantage for using a controller like Push. Now, we've converted what we just played to a simpler instrument. So you can hear how this texture, it's a lot more interesting than if I had just been playing a non-MPE synth, right? We have all those different layers of motion happening, and now that it's being resampled and played through simpler, it's adding another layer of texture to that, which gives it a sort of lo-fi quality that is what I tend to go for. We didn't have a tempo before, but now that I have this drone, I'm kind of feeling a slower tempo, so I've gone ahead and finally set that in the project. And just doing a little cropping of the sample. I'll adjust the envelope a bit so that its attack and release are just a natural sort of subtle fade in, subtle fade out. Now I'm experimenting with playing this in different tones. Like, could I make a chord progression out of this, or could I imply a chord progression with this drone sound? Ultimately, I end up abandoning this idea, and I just use it once again as a drone. Since this sound is going to be looping, I'm going to want that attack and release to be pretty smooth so that I don't get any clicks, or it's not very obvious when it comes back around and starts looping again. This is a fun little exercise at the beginning of making a track, especially if you're not sure what direction you can go. Try making something and then basically mangling it by sampling it and see what direction it leads you in. So at the very least now, I'm just going to get rid of that original track that had the drift synth on it, and now we'll just record this drone in time as a clip. And we have plenty of room because we've recorded a long drone sound, so we can pretty much hold this down for the full 4 bars and then have it loop around again. Now we can start dialing in some effects, of course adding some reverb and some space onto this sound is going to help it be that much more atmospheric. But what do we build around this drone now? Now is when I'll start to think about probably some chord progressions, probably some rhythm. What kind of track is this? So this first sound I've selected here, it's kind of got the same spacey quality as the drone has, and I'll experiment on it for a little bit, but I think it's too much of a similar quality to this drone sound. So now, choosing something that's a little more of a traditional electric piano sound. It fits with the drone, but it's not blending into the drone. This is a sound from my Spectral Keys pack. So I've been working really hard over the past year to collect and organize sounds that I think are sounds that are what make my personal artistic sound, right? So me making this Spectral Keys pack with these keyboard instrument sounds, I can always reach for these electric keyboards, and they've got sort of my artist DNA in them, I guess you can say. So even though we loaded up that electric piano sound, I want to get a sense of time, and I want to have a sense of time without actually listening to the metronome. I want it to be a little less rigid than a metronome. So I'm gonna load up a drum kit, and in a similar fashion to, crafting my own keys sound, I've been trying to craft my own drum kits. Now these might not have all of my own original samples in them, but they're like curated collections that I know I like. So now while listening to the metronome, I'll lay down this just simple hi-hat loop. Closed hi-hat, open hi-hat, atmospherics with these chimes. And you can hear they're certainly not perfectly in time with the metronome, and we're going to keep it that way. But now I've recorded this rhythmic loop that isn't quite rigid like a metronome, and I'm ready to go back to that electric piano and build the rhythm of the electric piano around this rhythm that we've already recorded. So by nature, it'll be, I think, more free-flowing, more human in feel than if I had just recorded to a metronome. Super simple to just loop a basic idea like that, and this is going to be our initial chord progression of the track, right? There's some flourishes and some notes on top, but ultimately those root notes are anchoring us on like a 1-4 chord progression that we can now build other elements of the track around. A little bit of filtering on the drums there. When I'm working on music, I tend to find that my drums are a little bit too loud, especially hi-hats. They get to me a lot. So usually much later in my mixing process, I'm having to bring the drums way down in the mix. So apologies if as we work on this track, the drums are a bit too loud. We've got a dreamy lo-fi beat forming here. So I'm going to start to layer in other drum elements. Of course, I could just finger drum in a full pattern, with kick and snare and hi-hat and everything. But sometimes doing the individual elements on their own, I don't become limited to only what I can play via finger drumming. so I can create slightly more interesting patterns by taking every element, the kick and the snare, one by one. So here we'll start to lay down a kick pattern. I think I can have a lot better control over my velocity too when I do this, because the push pads are so sensitive. You really have to train to play and perform in a natural way and have your velocity sound natural. I usually bounce between wanting to have these really organic percussion sounds and just traditional hip-hop snares. I think there's different use cases for both, obviously. There was one particular hit though where the velocity went crazy on there. I'm able to scan through the clip here on push, find it and bring it down on velocity. And the interesting thing about this is I think this is actually a little bit more intuitive than going in with a mouse, finding a little note, bringing down the velocity, using that wheel and scrolling through different notes and just honing in on the velocities. Really fluid and natural on push. There's some instances where it's easier to use your mouse, but there's some instances where the controller is doing its job. It's making the workflow more convenient. Check, 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 check. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. I do like to use human voice a lot in my beats. It adds a human element. It brings the human back into like this otherwise electronic processed genre. Just a simple bed of a vocal tone or something is what I usually reach for. So I'm going to sample in my own voice. Sometimes I'm grabbing other people's voices, but if I can, I like to just, sing a couple notes and use that as a sample. Now, similar to how we worked with the drone initially, the intent here is going to be to convert this vocal sample to a simpler. I do want to throw some quick pitch correction, and on the note of some things being easier on a controller, some things being just easier with your mouse and keyboard. If you've got 100 plugins, hundreds of plugins like I do, like I'm scrolling through my Waves plugins right now, it is just like, let me just click on it. And it's also just like, use collections and use tagging to the best of your ability. That has saved me a lot of time in trying to find exactly what I want without having to touch the computer. But sometimes it is just easier to type something in the search bar, click on it, and load it up. So once we've got the pitch locked in on that note, I actually didn't need to do that at this stage because when we convert this to a simpler, Live does a very convenient thing where we're kind of like not doing any destructive things to the sound and the effects that are on it. It just carries over all those effects, VSTs, everything over to the simpler instrument. So now I can play my voice like an instrument and add a human layer to this dreamy lo-fi beat. When you pitch a vocal down like this, I like it because it can transform your vocal from sounding totally like you and like a giveaway that it is you, the singer, and it sounds more like a sample rather than a person singing. I think that's important when you're using a vocal, because vocals can sometimes take over. A listener thinks they're supposed to listen to a vocalist, so they're trying to bring that to the front of the mix in their mind. If you've manipulated the voice to sound like a sample, it becomes part of all the other instruments rather than a focal point. Nothing too transformative here, but on the note of having this voice blend in with the other elements, we are adding quite a bit of reverb. To me, it feels like the vocals are breathing along with the track in a way. Here comes that moment where I'm feeling like we need to add in that solid hip-hop snare. But you can hear after a while of listening to just the natural percussion with this snare that we're tightening up right about now, making it a little bit shorter, bringing up the pitch. You can hear that bringing in a solid snare like that, it does have your head nodding a little bit more than with the just traditional or more organic percussion sound. It's probably coming in a bit loud here, but again, drum mixing is something I saved till way later in the process. This process right now is just about getting ideas out there. And along the way, I've been preserving the different versions of these ideas, or at least the drums, because we initially built a hi-hat only pattern, then we added kick, now we're adding snare. So I've been just duplicating as I go so that I can always jump back to the other versions of those drum loops. I can always jump back in session view and play the percussion only version or the kick only version. That comes in handy not only in the writing process but later in the arrangement process, because I essentially have these different patterns built that can be used in different sections of the song. And I think at this point, I'm unsure where to go musically. We've got a nice bed of music here. And usually when I get to a point like this, I start to manipulate some of the sounds that we already have. So I'm looking for a way to further obscure these vocals. And one technique I like to use a lot on audio is using pitch loop 89. It's essentially a granular device that can be randomized, and it's going to grab different parts of the audio over time, little grains. It's really easy to randomize, that's why I like it a lot. And I can blend in the grains with the natural dry recording as well. Just a little more to make that voice sound less like a singer singing into a microphone. You can start to hear some of those pitches clash with each other. That tail on that vocal is really nice. I should resample that. We don't do that, of course, but I should have. So now that I've done that for a bit, I've got this idea to add some guitar. I think guitar will fit nicely where everything in this track so far is almost adjacent to a pad sound. Even the electric piano, which has a decent attack like an electric piano does, everything is sort of blending together in a washy, round kind of way. Having a clean guitar texture within that, I think it'll add like a little bit of grit. I'm not saying we're going to be playing a super dirty guitar sound or anything, but the sound is in a different place than all the other elements in our track. And full disclosure about me, I don't have any formal guitar training at all. Everything that I can play is purely just self-taught. So you'll hear me play a lot of wrong notes. But in this stage, I'm trying to figure out what does the guitar need to be doing. The electric piano is playing a sparse melody almost, and all the other elements are sort of summing up to a big spacey chord. So I think the guitar needs to add a little bit of motion. Here is where I start to find where the guitar should be. A little bit of that is finding the note range of the instrument. What note range should I play in that's going to blend well with everything else? And this tone, this note range sort of sits under the electric piano sparse melody. It follows along the chordal rhythm of the track in a nice way, or at least we get it to a point where it does. Fixed recording is really convenient with Push, fixed length recording, especially when recording guitar. Of course, it does help if you play the right notes. But fixed length recording is very useful because I don't have to worry about punching back into recording. I can play out a full phrase on the guitar and it'll automatically loop back for me after, 4 or 8 bars, whatever I set it to. I found some good things in that little exploration of that melody, but I lost my way at some point. So I think we got one more take in us. And I'll kind of find exactly what I want to play. There's a little bit of buzz and noise on the guitar. I've just got so much electronics running to be able to shoot this session and capture everything. I'm sure I'm introducing noise somewhere with the recording equipment or something. We'll just call it lo-fi. And just like that, that feels pretty natural, and your ear is drawn to this guitar melody. And if you pay attention later on in the interaction between the guitar and the electric piano, the electric piano fills in the gaps of the guitar, or I guess since the electric piano came first, the guitar is filling the gaps in between the electric piano flourishes. If you're gonna have like multiple melodic things happening, multiple things that could catch the listener's ear, they really shouldn't be overlapping too much. Also, the delay is really making that guitar sound. I'm using Guitar Rig for that tone. It's a rack that I call Western guitar. I don't know why I called it that. It reminds me of like playing a clean guitar at dusk in the desert, I guess. It's another example of, building instruments and presets and drum racks and saving them so that I can always go back to them, and then my sound will just be more consistent over time. I'm not constantly reaching for a new sound. Tried to kill a little bit of that noise with some subtractive EQ. Back to obsessing about the vocals. I don't know if you're watching this, if you have a particular element in your music that you tend to obsess over getting it to sound right, but vocals seem to be a sticking point on this particular track. Ultimately, I want these vocals to be wide, so doubling them, panning one hard left and one hard right, and then slightly delaying one of those with track delay makes for a nice wide sound. Again, all contributing to the not having it sound like a singer on stage, front and center, listen to the singer, everybody. No, that's not what we want. I want it more like a choir, like the voices encircling you. So width is obviously an easy way to accomplish that. See these scenes that we've created in session view here on the push. That's a result of what I was talking about earlier, just duplicating as I go, so I can constantly grab different versions of the clips and different scenes of the track, a version that doesn't have this guitar in it and only has the electric piano, etc. Now I'm quickly setting up a sidechain compressor. Now that we've got our core elements, it's another example of like, okay, I don't know where to go next, so let me work on something that I know I want to do. I know sidechain compression is like a big part of my sound and my music. I like to have everything pumping and reacting to the kick drum. So if you hit a creative wall, there's always these tasks in your music that you kind of know, oh, I'm going to be doing this later, so I've hit a creative wall, let me dive into one of these tasks I'm going to do later anyway. Usually by the time I finished that task, I'm able to jump back into another creative idea or another musical element. Okay, this is not musical at all. I wanted to light some incense, but in this moment, I'll tell you about the recording process here, the video recording process. So there's 3 cameras set up. This camera that we're looking at right now is like actually tracking me. That's why you see it moving sometimes. That's an Osmo Pocket 3. Pretty cool camera. It's actually my new favorite camera. It's very convenient for shoots like this, where I might move a little bit and it'll follow me. And then this camera up here is a Sony a7 IV that's shooting the straight down shot over us. I'm adjusting the exposure on these cameras because the sun is going down as I'm shooting this. It's one of the caveats of shooting with daylight in a room and not artificial lighting, is the light changes over time. If you look up into towards the right corner of the frame, this overhead shot here is a Lumix GH5 camera. So that's shooting over my shoulder. And then all the audio is getting recorded into a Tascam Portacapture X6, and then all this gets synced later in the video editor, Final Cut Pro, and then I switch between the cameras. It's kind of a lot, but I enjoy showing the process. But enough about the visual process. Here now I'm just gonna add a bass. My bass lines are usually very, very boring. I think I should probably develop my skill in bass a bit more. But generally, I just try to find a nice, low, subby bass that doesn't call attention to itself. It's more something you can feel. So if you're not listening to this on headphones right now, you probably can't even hear that root note. But hopefully you can at least feel it. But even a simple bass line, even a bass line that plays the root note of your chords only, that can significantly change the feeling of the song. Especially when you introduce a bass and then take it away. I think the listener can sense a lot of change when we go from having a very low subby bass to having no bass at all. Now I'm searching. I've taken out the drums, right? Now I'm starting to think about this track's structure. We can only get so far on the elements that we have, so eventually we'll need to introduce a new instrument in sort of a B section, a bridge or something. So that's where this piano comes in. I like Arturia's piano plugin. You can hear the sustain on it, even though I'm not using a sustain pedal, because it's got that control right on the UI of the plugin. So I can get a sustained sound here. Again, jumping back into session view, pulling certain elements out. And it sort of sits in the same place as the electric piano. I've pulled the electric piano out to make room for this piano. I want to go for sort of a more free playing sound. Not like playing a full cadence. Here is my cadence, listen to it now. And what even allowed me to pull out that electric piano was that we have that solid bass line that's still carrying our chord progression for us, or implying it at least. I'm always thinking about the shapes of my musical ideas, the shapes over time. So if you listen to this piano idea back, you can hear like it starts a bit lower, and gradually over time, I allow myself to go higher in range. I think I'm always thinking about what is the journey I'm taking the listener on. Okay, let's lift them up, or let's bring them down. It's a lot of options. So now we're completely in the mind of building up a B section. So adding in a more free playing drum part. I find that if you have a song or a beat and the music is all sort of a slave to time, right? It's always reacting to a grid one way or another, even if that grid is feeling humanized. Having a moment of a more free time playing, it gives the opportunity to take the listener away from, a more head bobbing beat like this, and let them dream a little bit, and then bring them back down to earth, at least structurally in your track. And that's what I'm thinking about here. Even though we're just working in session view, we're just working in scenes and clips and loops, I am thinking about, in the back of my mind, okay, eventually I'm going to want to turn this into a track on a timeline, and do I have enough material here to do that? And we probably get close by the end of this session, but there are also certain ideas and certain gestures and things that can happen only when you get over into arrangement view and start thinking about this as a finished track rather than this is almost like a one-person jam. That's why I used Ableton Live in the first place. And on the thought of sections and building up and bringing the listener up and bringing them down, certain things like top layer percussion, that just adds energy to your music. Or for me, that's how I interpret it. It's like adding energy and adding motion. The challenge here being that I've played everything a bit humanly and freely, so that finding a loop, percussion loop to go along with that isn't so rigid and landing evenly on 2s and 4s, that'll be a little bit of a challenge. But I do want to add that energy in the top end. I do watercolor painting as well, and in watercolor painting it's very hard to undo something you've already done. It's very hard to paint over an element. So I enjoy that in music. You can try different things, you can audition things, you can try to sculpt things into fitting into your track. But you do have to know, okay, if this doesn't work, I can just delete it. So ultimately here in that struggle to find a loop that would add energy, a top end loop, I've realized that I need to play something in so it fits with this groove that I've built. Everything is sort of playing together nicely here. I think the beat is a little bit crowded with all of the elements playing. So that's an arrangement thing that would happen later on, is deciding, should these two things be happening at the same time? Should they be mixed differently if they are happening at the same time? But I don't let myself get too bogged down with that in the moment. You have to have stages to your creative process. You can't think of everything all at once. It can be very paralyzing if you do that. So I try not to be too critical of myself in this creative stage, especially if I've got all these elements happening all at once. It might just be a little too distracting, but we can take care of that later. And of course, the instinct is to just continue adding. So do I really need another element? Probably not. I certainly don't need this synth sound, I would say. I don't need another melody, I don't need more chords. So what do I need? That's what I'm thinking in this moment. And can I make this sound that I've chosen fit? I think here I'm thinking, oh, I'll solo with a synth over the top of it. But ultimately I'm finding that to be a fool's errand. There's too much melody happening already. So I'll search through some sounds and try to get the sound selection to help guide this process. There's no commitment to keep something if you try it. But landing on this drift preset, there's room for a little more atmosphere here for sure. I tend to drift way too close to everything having to be somewhat melodic. I'm really trying to fight that instinct. So if this element, if I don't need more melodies, and this element is just meant to be atmosphere, I need to allow it to be that. We're at the stage where I'm pretty satisfied with all the elements that I have. It's got a dreamscape vibe to it, I would say. And it's at this stage that I'll usually end up dropping, master effects in on there. It'll bring the loudness up. It'll also add some character to the sound, so using J37 by Waves to give it a little bit of that analog tape warmth. And now, going back into session view and thinking about, okay, how will this track work? And I love that we live in an age where I don't have to do that with pencil and paper. I'm not writing out a score. Instead, this process of arrangement and putting together all these musical ideas is done almost via a performance method. So I can launch different scenes and feel how different sections might sound, feel if they need something else, feel if they're too busy. Here I'm starting to have that battle in my head about if my drums are too loud or not. So now this part is just fun. At the end here, it's like, okay, let me play through this as if this were a performance. If I imagine myself playing this for an audience right now, do I have enough musical ideas here? Does the structure work? What's the lowest amount of musical ideas that I could be playing and have it still be a track? So here you can hear that piano against that initial drone loop. And I'm reminded that this whole track even started with, you know, recording an MPE synth and then basically resampling it, turning it into a simpler. I couldn't have predicted that the track was going to go in this direction, but that's sort of the beauty of this process. And that's one reason I like capturing this process, and I haven't done one of these uncut commentary videos in a while, but I think it's useful to see the process from beginning to end uncut without, you know, filtering out all the painful moments of trying to make something work. So here we're truly in performance mode. I've loaded up a performance rack. We'll do some filtering. We'll do some beat repeats. I'm back to imagining that we're doing an intro. I think we're getting ready to drop the beat in a little bit. A little more build up first. You can see how it's gotten quite dark since we've started. So a low pass filter, and then bringing those lows back in with kick only, kick plus hi-hat. You can hear, like, it's like tightening a guitar string little by little by little and anticipating it to break or snap. Now obviously when that happens it's not satisfying, but when we eventually bring this snare in again, it's going to be a head nodding, satisfying listening experience, or at least I hope it is. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But that brings us to the end here, and I hope you've enjoyed this uncut commentary on making a beat. I want to thank Ableton for sponsoring this video. If you're curious about live, or if you're curious about Push 3, check out the links in the description. If you enjoy this type of video, please let me know in the comments. It's something we can do again in the future. And on that, thank you all so much for watching. This has been Datro. Have a good one.